In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Please be seated. I failed to introduce myself. Some of you may not know me. I feel like I know most of you. I am Steve Ferguson. I am probably the permanent part-time assistant here. I look back in the Red Book, and the last time I was here was in October. That's too long. I like being with you. And my wife, Bonnie, is here with me. Bonnie, raise your hand. Bonnie's really the better half, because when people come up to me, they say, "Hey, Steve, where's Bonnie?" Sure makes you feel good, telling you. Well, it's good to be back with you. I shared with the 8 o'clock service that my habit as a preacher is to preach on the gospel lesson. But the unpardonable sin is not something I want to get into today, and I'm sure you don't want to hear about that. And if you think I'm going to touch that Genesis reading, you got another thing coming. I'm not going to go there. But we are going to talk about Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. You know, someone asked one time, why is there 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians? Did they just divide it into two? And the answer is no. Paul did indeed write two different letters. The first one was to write to the church that he had established in Corinth, to say, look, there's some things that you're doing and there's some things you're not doing, and you need to take care of these things and get your church straightened out. And the second one was written because of a letter he got from Titus telling him how the church had responded or not responded, as the case may be, to his first letter. So what we see in this second letter is Paul admonishing them again to not give up. But have you ever noticed that there's some people who just can't seem to win? It doesn't matter what is going on around them, they seem to be the one that catches the worst of it. There's a story that happened back in 1957. Some of us remember 1957. I was just a babe at that time. But Richie Ashburn, who was an outfielder for the Philadelphia Phillies, had hit a foul ball, and it went into the stands and hit a spectator by the name of Alice Roth. Well, as Alice was being carried out of the stadium on a stretcher, Richie Ashburn hit another foul ball, and guess where it went? It hit Alice again. You know, you really have to think about who you are when you get hit by two foul balls in the same inning. But anyway, there was a story it appeared in the New York Times a few years ago. It was an ad, actually, that was put out by Hayden Planetarium, and it was an invitation for anyone who would like to be on the first journey to another planet. Now think about that. Some of you are saying, okay, where do I sign up? 18,000 people responded. And as psychologists went through these applications, what they discovered is that the vast majority of those people who applied wanted to start a new life in a different planet than the one they lived on. They were not happy with their lives here. Maybe some of you can relate to that. Maybe you're so discouraged with your life that you would like to go somewhere else but here and start over. Charlie Brown used to lament about that a lot to Linus, and one time he says, sometimes I feel like I just want to get away from everything. And the next panel shows Snoopy, who overheard that conversation, and he said, I remember having that same feeling when I was just a puppy at the Daisy Hill Puppy Farm. I climbed over the fence to run away, but I was still in the world. And that's the problem, isn't it? We're trying to run away from the problems. No matter where we go, there are going to be things that get the best of us. But you know that you and I are really, when we really think about it, we're the problem. But Paul, the Apostle Paul, had at least as many problems as you and I have, and probably many more. He was arrested, he was persecuted, he was flogged, he was shipwrecked, he was eventually martyred. He'd given up all the comforts of family life. You know, some people say that Paul was not married, but Paul did have to be married. This is a little extra you get in this sermon today. They say, well, how do you know that it doesn't say anything about him having a wife? No, it doesn't. But Paul was a member of the Sanhedrin, which is the Supreme Court, if you will. It was of the Pharisees. And one of the requirements to be in the Sanhedrin is that you had to be married. So we don't know what happened to Paul's wife, but he turned sour on marriage one way or the other. But he never got discouraged, at least not that we see in the Gospels. He never gave up. He never felt sorry for himself. And we might ask, why is that? And I think it's because he had an enormous faith in God. Now listen as he writes in today's lesson to the second epistle to the Corinthians. Therefore, you know, my mother, the English teacher, always said, anytime you see the word therefore, pay close attention to what it's there for. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes on what is seen, but we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. You see, my friends, the essence of who we are is not this body. Some of you are saying, thank the Lord for that. We are spirits. We are created in God's image to be eternally spiritual, to be spirits that live eternally, one either with God or apart from God, depending on our choices. But what a magnificent statement of faith that was that Paul made. That's all of 2 Corinthians is intensely purposeful to those that he had helped come to faith in Jesus Christ. And some had done very well, but others were not. But our question is, what made Paul endure all of this suffering? Remember, Paul was the one, before he met the risen Christ on the road to Damascus, was one of the persecutors. In fact, he was going to Damascus to bring back Christians for persecution, possibly even execution. But Paul's faith then became in an unmovable God. And whatever you read about Paul, know that he was an amazing man. Yes, he was a misogynist. He was a patriarchal, overbearing, well-versed Pharisee. But Jesus changed him. He had a changed life. You know, Paul himself writes, if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. And Paul knew that better than anybody because of what his life had been. You know, I think we really are more like Tevye in the Broadway musical Fiddler on the Roof. How many of you have seen Fiddler on the Roof? One of my favorites. Bonnie and I got to see it again last year down in the theater district. And Tevye, through the whole play, has a running conversation with God. Okay? And so one day he's out in his horse became lame, and so he's sitting by the side of the road, dejected with this lame horse, and he says to God, I can understand it when you punish me when I'm bad, or when my wife talks too much, or my daughter when she wants to go off and marry a Gentile. But he looks up and he says, but what have you got against my horse? I think some of us can identify with Tevye. We sit in our lives wondering, why did this happen to me? Why did God let this happen to me? Most time we say, God, why did you do this to me? And God doesn't do bad things to his people. But sometimes he allows them to happen for a reason. Paul wasn't like that. Paul could go with the flow. Paul had this amazing faith in God, and it's the kind of faith that I wish I had, and maybe you do too. You see, people who have faith when battling overwhelming odds inspire the rest of us. Bonnie and I have a very dear friend who 14 months ago was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Had many other ancillary things going on with that in the bile ducts and so forth. Surgery after surgery, ended up with several rounds of chemotherapy. But initially, they told him, at this oncologist he had gone to, you might as well just go home, get your affairs in order, and wait for the end. Well, Reggie was a lot like Paul. He says, I don't accept that. So he and his wife said, let's go to MD Anderson. They get to MD Anderson and they said, we can fight this. 14 months later, after being given a prognosis of 6 to 8 weeks to live, Reggie is still with us. Because he would not give up. No matter what was going on, he was an inspiration to me. We pray for him every day, right? Every single day. But his outward body is wasting away. But Reggie knows where his strength comes. And it doesn't come from the doctors. It certainly doesn't come from the chemo and all of that. His strength comes from the Lord. Sort of like, remember a story of Jim Valvano. Anybody remember Jim Valvano, who was coach? North Carolina State. He also was diagnosed with advanced cancer. And just 8 weeks before he died, he was on the ESPY Awards on ESPN, being given the very first Arthur Ashe Courage and Humanitarian Award. And at that time, he announced that he had created a foundation dedicated to trying to find cures for cancer. And there's many of those that have been set up. But he announced that his foundation's motto would be, don't give up. Don't ever give up. And that's the way he lived his life. It's interesting. You can watch this speech on YouTube, but there was a teleprompter there. And the teleprompter told him he had 30 seconds. And he says, look at that. The guy's telling me I got 30 seconds. Like I care about that. I got tumors all over my body, and I'm worried about some guy in the back going 30 seconds. But what he said is this. To me, there are 3 things we should do every day. We should do this every day of our lives. Number 1 is to laugh, and I totally agree with that. You know, Solomon said laughter is good medicine. Solomon didn't understand the medical reasons for that laughing causes our bodies to secrete the feel-good hormone and improves our well-being. So he said we should laugh. You should also think. Think about something. Spend time in thought every day, not just, okay, what am I going to do next month or next year, but what is happening to me now? And number 3, you should have your emotions moved to tears. In other words, it could be happiness or joy, but the 3 things you should do every day is laugh, think, and cry. Now think about that. Think about what that would do for your life. That speech became legendary, and he closed by saying this: cancer can take away all of my physical abilities. It cannot touch my mind. It cannot touch my heart. It cannot touch my soul. And those 3 things are going to carry on forever. I thank you, and God bless you all. He could have been paraphrasing the Apostle Paul. Though outwardly our bodies are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Jesus told the disciples, I'm going away. I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'm going to come and bring you to myself. And that's what Paul is reminding us of. What we live in and what we do today in this physical world, in these physical bodies, is just temporary. Our spirits, our souls are eternal. That's the part that makes us like God. I wish I could take credit for this because I like it, but it was actually from a Bible student preacher named Vance Havner. And he said once that the Christian life has 3 levels. He said, there are days when things are going well or we have something incredibly wonderful happen to us. Those are mountaintop experiences. Anybody ever had a mountaintop experience? I have. I've had many of them. But life is not to be lived on the mountaintops. They certainly are good. We're grateful for those. And sometimes it helps us see the beauty and majesty of God and the wonder of God working in our lives. But most of the time we live in ordinary days. Not mountaintop days, ordinary days. It's appropriate, I think, that have you noticed the color had changed in the last couple of weeks? We wear green. We're in the season after Pentecost. Not the season of Pentecost, the season after Pentecost. And it's the color that we use for this season is green. And it's sometimes been called the long green season because it goes on forever. It doesn't end till the first Sunday in Advent. Here's another liturgical lesson. It can be longer than it will be this year because if Easter is early, Pentecost goes on even longer than forever. Anyway, those are ordinary days. When we're young, those days seem to be boring. But as we get older, such days become reassuring for us. How many of you have to raise your hands, how many of you have thought to yourself, well, today no news is good news. It just gets us through that day, and we're fine. Finally, there are dark days. I call them valley days. We got mountaintop experiences, ordinary days, and valley days. Sometimes those dark days can string out into weeks or even months for some people with no seeming sense of relief or victory. And eventually, all of us will experience those dark days. I have dark days. Well, no, I want to ask you to raise your hand. You already know. Why do we have those dark days, and why does God allow them to be a part of our life? And I said, first of all, they offer the greatest opportunity for spiritual growth. When you are down and out, when things seem dark, where do we go? We reach out to God. And God says, here's what you need. I will be with you. And most of the time we can realize God has been with us the whole time. He's never left us because He promises never to leave us. So we've been through that time of testing. It gives us confidence that we can handle the next test in our life. John Sargent was a painter, and he once painted a panel of roses that was highly praised by critics. It was a small picture, but it approached perfection. And John Sargent was offered many times by many people a very high price for this painting, but he would never sell it. He was very proud of it, but he kept it to himself. And someone says, why do you hold on to it? You could make a lot of money off of that. He said that whenever he's deeply discouraged and doubtful of his abilities as an artist, which happens, artists, writers, anybody in a creative, hit those blocks, don't they? He said, I look at that painting and say, I painted that. I painted that. Then his confidence and ability comes back to him. Now, some of you have been through difficult times, and you recall those times that you say, you know what, I did that. I did that once. I can do it again. That's God reassuring us. By God's grace, those times make us better. They give us confidence in ourselves, but moreover, in God's power. But there's a second benefit of dark days. It gives us an opportunity to witness to our faith. Any of you ever been to Winchester Cathedral in England? One, they're nodding their heads over there. Okay, you know what I'm about to say. When I went, you come up to it, and it's a huge cathedral. In fact, it is the longest medieval cathedral in the world, 583 feet. 583 feet, I'm sorry. But you come up to it, and there's these beautiful set of windows there, but it doesn't look like an 11th century cathedral, because you see, in the 11th century, all stained glass had biblical pictures of biblical stories or saints or Jesus and things that we could look at and visualize. But this looks like a modern window. But here's the story of how it got there. During the English Revolution, Winchester sat at a crossroads, a very strategic crossroads, and the Cavaliers, who were loyal to the king and the crown, were occupying Winchester Castle in the city. And the Roundheads, who were loyal to Parliament and anti-loyal to the crown, rode in and captured the city. Now, these Roundheads had not been paid in a while, so they were in a foul mood, and they raided the, might say the liquor cabinet, the stores of alcohol, of beer and wine in the city, and proceeded to get rip-roaring drunk and tearing the city up. And finally, they rode their horses into the cathedral. They tore open the caskets and the sarcophagi there, looking for treasures, and all they found was, what do you think they found in those caskets? Bones. Just bones. Imagine all these drunk soldiers looking for diamonds and jewels, and they find bones. Well, they got angry and just started throwing the bones at the windows and broke all the windows out. So those that had guns shot some windows out themselves. And when they finally left, the people of the town came out, and they gathered up the pieces of the broken stained glass and the bones, carried them back to their homes, and hid them under their beds. A few years later, when the monarchy was restored under Charles II, they brought the glass and bones back and said, put our windows back. Well, it was impossible. Windows, with all of those pieces, there's no way they could put them back the way they were. They didn't have pictures or digital photographs or anything. They couldn't even put the bones back in the right place. They just decided to put some here, some there. So if you go to Winchester Cathedral thinking you're going to see the bones of some saints, they're scattered everywhere. But this beautiful window that you see when you walk up today was the product of brokenness. They didn't have windows representing Bible stories again, but it tells the story of how the faithful people were able to be agents of something much more beautiful. Broken to be beautiful. You know, at some point in our lives, we might have that same testimony. I've been broken to be beautiful. Anybody can handle a mountaintop experience and the normal days, ordinary days of our lives. But sometimes our lives are a mess. Sometimes things happen where we say, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. But we do. And people look at us and say, wow, how did you do that? Well, the only way I made it was with God's help. That becomes a testimony to the power of God to restore our lives, not the way they were, but better than they were. Finally, when we live through dark days, we're better able to empathize with others. People are kind of look at me kind of strange when I tell them I was 42 years old when I started seminary. And I've been a priest for 30 years. You do the math, okay? And I used to say in my mind, and I would ask God, why have I avoided you so long? Because in looking back on my life, I could see that God was calling me for years before I ever said, yes, I will. I did everything you could do in a church trying to please God. You know, I was a lay reader, chalice bearer, Sunday school teacher. I even did vacation Bible school. Mm-hmm. How many of you are doing vacation Bible school? The rest of you should. I even changed the lights in the steeple because nobody else would do that. That wasn't what God was calling me to do. And I began to say, oh, I've wasted so much of my adult life. And what God spoke to me and said is, nothing is wasted in my kingdom. Because you see, the experiences, the life experiences that I have, God has used over and over and over again. Especially in my ministry as a chaplain. Before I go into a room, I pray, Lord, let me be your servant and let me be a witness to these people. Because when I step over that threshold, I'm already better than the one lying in the bed. I still tell our new employees in orientation, part of one of our core values is compassion, where we will minister with comfort and empathy. And I say, what's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Sympathy says, I'm sorry you're hurting. Empathy says, I feel your pain. Those dark days give us that pain that we can feel in others. And not to say, look what I did, but to say, I know how you feel. And to be a witness to God's power. That's the believer's hope. It's the hope that caused Stephen to look up as they were stoning him and say, Father, forgive them and receive my spirit. It's the same hope that those early Christians had as they were led off to be martyred in the Colosseums or to be set on fire to be used as street lights in the city because they wouldn't recant their faith in Jesus. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Hope says, this too shall pass. Hope says, I will not give up or despair. For all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. The message, my friend, is do not lose heart. That's our witness to an unbelieving world. We live, whether you think the world is Christian or not, it's not. We live in a post-Christian, postmodern society where to be a Christian is persecutable. And it's going to get worse. But we need to witness the power of God to an unbelieving world. We need to live full the love of Jesus Christ, whether we're on the mountaintop or whether we're in those dark days, or on the level plain. Wherever we are, God is with us to hold us, to empower us, to make us into the people he created us to be. Amen.